Alright, everybody, so this is our second video, and this one talks about specifically an IA that I read and that you should have read, and I gave this student an 18 out of 24. Alright, that's it for this video, so hope you enjoyed watching it. Just kidding. So let's talk a little bit about why I gave this student an 18 out of 24. The first part of the rubric is the personal engagement. I gave this student a 1 out of 2. The reason why I gave them a 1 out of 2 on the personal engagement really was because they didn't really relate it to themselves or why it was important to the world. Yes, I felt like they did a lot of background research, and that background research was important for them to, like frame out the question. Their method seemed really complete. That's also something that I think about when I do personal engagement. How much time and effort did they use to seek out background research, and also how much time did they put into the method and making it their own. So if we look at the rubric here for this, I felt that they definitely had initiative in designing, implementing, and the presentation of the investigation. So this part down here, I felt like this was definitely, a 2. But then I didn't feel like they had any personal significance, and so that was like a 0 really. So I averaged it out, I gave them a 1. All right, let's talk about the next part, which is the exploration. That's the background and the methods. And I gave them a 5 out of 6 on this. I felt like the methods were mostly appropriate. I had a little bit of trouble when I was reading this about, why did they go and use the spectrophotometer right in the beginning. It just seemed weird to me, and then it dawned on me later that perhaps they were using that to get a baseline before any sort of oxidation occurred, but it wasn't clear, and they didn't really explain that in the method, and so I sort of, took off a point for that. But I loved how in the method, if we look at this here, if we go to the paper, if we look at the method here, they go through for each method, and you see I highlight here, this part right here, they really go through and they talk about like why they're doing everything and why they're controlling this. And so, that to me was really great. And the method was pretty clear. So I did like that. So I also like the research question, and that's part of the background too. The research question here, it's listed right at the beginning. They use a very specific focused research question. It was a good one. They talk about the independent variable and the five levels they're going to use, 5 different temperatures. I thought it was good. The background I also felt was really thorough. And for me, I learned some stuff about this that I didn't know about. I think it really helped frame out what the research question was, and it led me to the method really well. Okay, so that is the exploration. So let's talk about the analysis. So the analysis I thought was also really good. I gave them a 5 out of 6 on this as well. They had a lot of data. They did 3 trials across their 5 independent variables, 5 levels of their independent variable. They did a lot about uncertainty. And the only thing I had an issue with was I was confused about, what was the background of the absorbance. When you do spectrophotometry, you have a background, and they should have really subtracted that, and they didn't. If we look at the paper for this, though, and we see why I gave them a 5, just go to that section. Something else about the exploration here is the safety. I like that they put in about the safety. That was great. I looked at that and I was like, yeah, they needed to put in the safety. They didn't really talk about the disposal, at least not here. I wish they would have done that as well. But when I look at the data collection and I look at the analysis, they mention qualitative observations. That's great. You're supposed to put in qualitative observations. You need to have a paragraph or 2 about that. They label their tables nicely and they organize their data really well, and I thought that was really important. They talk about and they do a sample calculation. So they show the mean here, and then they show a sample calculation. They show the calculation for uncertainty. They show the calculation for rate. The thing I had an issue with rate here is that, they didn't know the right unit for rate. Rate is an hours -1. That came up in the communication part, really, but, it's also there in the analysis. I wish that they knew more about what a rate was, and I wish also that they took more time points. They took 0 and they took 72 hours. It's hard to do a rate with 2 data points. You can, and they did, but it's not the best. The graphs were good, but the graphs, again, like for this analysis part, I wish that they had an R² value that tells you how linear the line is. And titles on the graph would have been nice. That went to communication as well. So, I gave them a 5 out of 6 for this. If we take a look at the rubric here, and I just want to go through what I put for that band here, because this is where students lose a lot of points. They gave a lot of qualitative data. That was good. They show sufficient data processing. They did the sample calculations. The report shows evidence of appropriate consideration of uncertainty, and the process data is correctly interpreted, so that is completely valid. Again, I didn't love that they didn't have that background there. I didn't know if they necessarily knew what a rate was, and I didn't like that they didn't take multiple time points for the rate. And then for the evaluation, so this is sort of like wrapping everything up here, I gave them a 3. This is where it fell apart. They didn't mention any of the extensions. They didn't talk about any extensions, what they would do to sort of expand this experiment at all. And that was like a 0. They talked about their weaknesses, but they didn't really talk about their strengths very much. Their ideas for improvements, they outlined a few of them and described them. I don't necessarily know if they went like beyond and got creative, and if any of those improvements really were all that useful. So I took off some points for this. If we look at the paper here, though, just to sort of, if I highlighted anything in here, something about the conclusion that bothered me was they never went back and actually really like analyzed their data here. I don't like that the IB calls the data presentation analysis. That's just data presentation. The conclusion and evaluating the data, they didn't really evaluate the data very much. They just sort of put in a paragraph and they said, yeah, my hypothesis was supported, and there's a slope that's positive, but yeah, that's it. And so for me personally, like that could have been a lot more. Like they had so much data there and then they didn't really go through it. And this is what students do. They don't analyze the data like that. And it's just, it bothers me. This is something that you need to really be able to do. Again, here I wrote cite data more deeply, use actual numbers. So yeah, I mean, these are their like improvements, but they don't really do any extensions. And something that really was interesting to me was when they did this experiment, they had all these different temperature oils, right? And then what they do is they just sort of like take them and the only one that they had to change the temperature was the one that they needed to thaw out the frozen oil. But they should have really, after the 72 hours, they should have taken a half an hour and put them all at the same temperature and then done the spectral photometry on it. That would have been better, because the reaction with the dichromate, that should have happened all at the same temperature, and they didn't control for that. So anyway, this was the paper. I give them an 18 out of 24. What would be really interesting to do now is to go here and to look, if I can find this one here, which I don't see it here. Hold on. We're going to go to here. Yeah, and it was investigation 7, 5, 6, 7, and we're going to go to the mark. And we're going to see what the moderator gave them. The moderator gave them a 19. Moderator gave them a 19 out of 24. They gave them a 1 out of 2 on personal engagement. We agreed with that. A 6 out of 6 on the exploration. I took off a point there. a 5 out of 6 on analysis. We agreed on that. I took off another point on evaluation, but for communication, I put on 4 points. And communication, just to go back to this here, communication runs throughout the whole paper. I felt like this paper was well written. I think that I really got what they were trying to say. It was clear. It was easy to read. It was easy to follow. It wasn't boring. It held within the 12 pages. Um, I thought that it was a good paper. Well, there's some issues. There were some, but for me they were minor, and I didn't really know this project that well, so yeah, I didn't take any points off for that. So look, hopefully you looked at this and you actually graded it, because that's what I really wanted you to do. And now that you've done that, and now you've seen how I grade it, this is what I do for you. I go through and I grade your paper, and I look at it. Yours are, I do a much more detailed job on yours, and I use a much more detailed rubric even than the one they gave you. And I didn't want to overwhelm you with that rubric, but we'll get to that. What I'd like you to do, and what we're going to go over in the third and final video, is really start to talk about, well, where does your project come in here? Let me go to, give me 1 second for the summer project. What did I do with that summer project? Now it's missing. Let me go to that summer assignment. I don't see it here. Okay, hold on. Oh, I think it's this one. Okay. Yeah. So we've done these steps so far. We've done step 1. You enrolled in the Google Classroom last time. You looked at the PowerPoint together last time. This time we went over the sample IA. We graded it. And now you're going to do some other things. You're going to start to really think about your own project. Think about your own project means start to come up with some ideas. Where can you get ideas from? Well, here are all the old labs that you've done. And so these are all the old labs that you've done. And then here are some ideas for you to think about with an IA, some possible experiments. If you go to my website here, this is my website, and I list this on the Google Classroom as well. I can show you that here. It says link to IA samples, and it'll bring you to that same one. But it opens in Safari. And then here are 10 papers for you to look at with 10 different ideas. And you can look at each of those papers. So here's paper 10. And this one was the mark scheme, but this one, investigating lipids suitable for manufacturing soap for a school project. So you could read that over. They got a 14 on that. So, you could go through and look at those different investigations. Here's this one here. This one was factors affecting the boiling and melting points in organic homologous series. This one actually might have been just a database type experiment. But you can see there's 10 of them there. And then something that I'm going to discuss with you next time is this particular, let me just find this here, is this particular one. Right here, I'm going to talk to you about the old IA papers, their titles. And I'll go through these papers with you so that you can, I'm just going to go through some of them and say, read these over. These are ideas that students used. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through the pitfalls with you so that you can look at this and be like, oh, yeah, now I can see why that might not have worked. So that's it for this class. What I want you to do for homework between now and watching the next video is really maybe even look at this old list here on your own. Look at the 10 papers here and take a look at them. You don't have to read them all, but you could look at the titles and see if anything's interesting to you. And also in the summer assignment here, please go through, sorry, 1 second. In the summer assignment here, please go through and look at some of these ideas. And next time, we'll talk a little bit about those papers, and I'll wrap this up for you, and I'll tell you what you have to do for the summer assignment, which is these steps here. All right, so hope you have a great day and everything, and thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this was helpful for you. All right.